At the first glance at the 2021 Toyota Venza spec sheet, it doesn't really seem to make that much sense up against a RAV4. The RAV4 is a very competitive compact crossover in its class and a very practical vehicle. And with the RAV4, it does offer quite a lot of things that you can find in this Venza here. So as a mid-size hybrid-only vehicle, the Venza doesn't seem to be that good of a value proposition over the RAV4. And certainly there are some things that when it comes to this vehicle versus a RAV4, I would recommend that smaller vehicle over this one. As for first example, even though this is a mid-size crossover, it doesn't have any more space in the rear seats. In fact, I actually think it's got a much more cramped rear seat space. Here's a video comparison of me getting into the back seats of the Venza and last week's car, the Toyota RAV4 Trail, but it does fulfill its mid-size credentials with having a much larger boot space. So this Venza is for people that are looking to put more things in the back of their car rather than people. But upon taking time in this past week reviewing this car, I have been able to fully immerse myself with the interior and the exterior design and think about the demographic of people that Toyota is going after with the Venza. After the amount of time that I have spent with this Venza, I really do think that Toyota has a worthy justification to rejuvenate the Venza name. I'm going to really compare the differences in prices and equipment for the Canadian models of the Venza Hybrid and the RAV4 Hybrid, as there are some exclusive things in here that you can just simply not find in a RAV4, and then bring up the price comparison of is it really worth the while. But I'll do that closer to the end of this video because I quite admire this SUV for being something that I don't think Toyota does very often, and that's to be bold and to be risky. So first of all, we'll get inside, we'll talk about the interior design and how all of that's put together, and then I'll take the Venza for a drive, and at the end of the video, I'll place it in my ranking system so I can tell you where I think it competes against its main rivals in the mid-size SUV category. One of the major reasons that I've come to really like this Venza is how daring Toyota have been with the design, exterior looks and interior looks. Starting off with the interior, it is pushing the boundaries, I think, of what Toyota has done in the past, and they've been particularly risky with this vehicle, and that's something that Toyota, you wouldn't typically describe them as. They'll take the safe bets, they'll let other manufacturers go ahead of them so they can monitor their successes, and then they'll come in later on. But in this vehicle, I don't feel like I've seen anything in comparison to any of the other mid-size SUVs that I've tested out. First things that I need to address with you is this huge 12.3-inch touchscreen that has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and the touch-sensitive array of buttons down here that you can use to change your volume, interact with the screen, the climate control. First of all, it does work when you have gloves on. That's a positive, but it is lacking some buttons that I think are crucial. First of all, there's no zone button, no AC button. You have to do all of that kind of a thing in the touchscreen. And judging by how big this screen is, if you're a shorter individual, you might have issues reaching for one side of it. So Toyota did something quite clever. You can slide the climate system from the driver to the passenger. So when it's over here, I can easily change around my settings. And then if my passenger's complaining that they're too cold, I'll just swipe it over to their side. No issues there. But you could, of course, use the touch panel down here, which it is just touching away and you get a sound feedback. There's no haptic. As it doesn't have every single button option that I'd want for the climate control, for example, and it doesn't seem to work any better than the touchscreen, I kind of forget to use it. Of course, I can complain that there's no volume knob. It is just touching away on that button, but of course we've always got the option on the steering wheel. So that's a little bit annoying. But getting away from that user experience, looking at the rest of the interior, the materials used, you might as well be in a Lexus in this vehicle. And next week I am getting the 2021 Lexus RX 350. And I'm particularly keen to see how well this stacks up in comparison to the Lexus, because all of the soft plastics that are down here in the center console, just how deeply plush everything that you touch along the door cards is, it would really make you question why you would buy a Lexus RX at all. The seats are extremely comfortable. Actually, you sit quite deep in them, but as a taller individual, I would like more under leg space to support my thighs. You can slide this console forwards and backwards and up, of course, where you'll have a fairly deep section and this tray that comes out. But this is where you have access to your heated and vented seats. Deep in forward of the shift lever, you've got your USB outlets, the wireless phone charger, and you've got the power button here, which kind of looks like an afterthought. It looks like they forgot to implement this somehow into the interior. They put it here, which looks a bit strange. Other things that aren't so great, I find it incredibly annoying that when you try to turn down the lights in the cabin, it doesn't also turn down the brightness of the screen. You have to do those two independently. You've got a soft plastic section in front of you on top of the dashboard, but then just beyond that, it's hard plastic, so I feel like they could have done a little more there. Being in the top trim limited version of the Venza, it's easy to show off to you some of the features that you can get in this mid-size vehicle that you can't find at all in the RAV4. First off, we've got a heads-up display, a full-size glass roof, and in the limited with frost control. So I just hit this button here and it goes from translucent to opaque. That's pretty cool. There's also ambient lighting and a 360-degree camera. So given the aesthetics and the vibes that I'm getting from this Venza, to me it very much feels like a vehicle that's designed for the city. It's a vehicle that's got a more premium sense to it in the way that you want to be seen in it in a downtown cityscape where you're filling it up with whatever big expensive shopping trip you just went on. Whereas the RAV4, you want to see it a little more out and about in the wild. You want to get it filthy, fill it up with skis and with friends. With this, it is very much something that is focusing on the style of a crossover rather than the practicality of one. So with all that said, let's start up the Venza, take this vehicle for a drive so I can tell you what the driving aspects of this thing is like, and then some of the other smaller details that come along with what you get in the top trim RAV4 versus the base version of this and how all the prices compare. So let's hit the road. With the exterior and interior design that, as I've explained, has been quite a daring move from Toyota, the driving experience with the Venza is pretty typical of the hybrid systems that we've seen in countless others of their products. Comparing the dimensions of the Venza to the RAV4, they both operate on the same powertrain. They're both based upon the Toyota New Global architecture, so they have the same wheelbase. The Venza is longer by about 5.4 inches, and that's mostly due to styling. It's a little bit lower, a little bit wider, so it has a little more road presence than the RAV4. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the rear seat space in this definitely isn't as good as what it is in the RAV4. I'm going to put those dimensions up on the screen now, as I can't quite remember them honestly. We have a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, an electric motor, a small battery pack, and all-wheel drive. With the combination of all these systems, it's able to produce a net horsepower of 219. Toyota can be a little difficult at times when it comes to finding out exactly how much power the electric motor produces, how much the engine is producing, because of course the peak power of an engine and the peak power of an electric motor aren't the same, so you can't just add those numbers together. But what it results in is the typical hybrid benefits and the typical hybrid woes. So I personally like driving hybrids in vehicles such as this that aren't meant to be anything special or dynamic, because it makes you more of an active participant in driving. I'm more acutely aware of when I'm in an electric driving, when I'm putting energy into the battery pack, or trying to be a more efficient driver by letting off of the gas sooner so I can brake, so I can go into an EV mode, so that I can eventually come to a stop in pure electric. So those are the benefits, is that for me, I find it actually somewhat enjoyable to drive because I'm actively thinking about my inputs as a driver. But there's still a couple things that if you don't like hybrids at all, then this is going to be no different for you. We don't have a tach, we just have a charge, eco and power gauge on the left. The brakes can feel a little bit inconsistent when you're in the regenerative mode and then when you're actually using the full physical brake. But you can still lock pure EV driving with this button right in front of the shifter. If you're going slow enough, you don't have enough auxiliary systems going, you can have a little bit more of pure electric drive for a little bit longer. You also can change your driving modes between eco, normal and sport, even though, quite frankly, I'm just keeping this car in normal. The sport and eco mode, really all they're going to change around is the throttle responsiveness. I do find it interesting that with this car that I'm trying, with the shift lever, if you knock it over to the side, you'll have the sport shifting mode, but of course this is a planetary gear set. There is no gears to speak of, so you can't shift anything. And in most hybrids, you'd knock it over to the side to have maybe more forceful regenerative braking, but it doesn't seem like anywhere in this car that is an option for you. Other aspects of the driving, despite there being quite a big blind spot behind you, I don't feel like visibility is a problem in this vehicle, just because it's got such a sure-footed road presence and the wing mirrors are large enough. Visibility in every other direction is okay. I've never once felt that visibility on the road has been an issue. Road noise and wind noise is pretty good, but definitely not the best in class. I was noticing quite a little bit of wind whistling coming off of the wing mirrors. This also means when you are on power, the 2.5 litre engine really does groan a lot. For example, like when I'm going up a hill now, that constant throttle foot position is going to dictate really a consistent noise from in front of the engine. You get no exhaust noise in this car, it's just the rattliness of this 4-cylinder engine. Okay, so now that I've said everything that I want to about the driving, let me quickly pull over so I can read to you all of the differences that will come if you choose a top-level RAV4 and this Venza. So, grabbing the trusty notebook, there we go. So when we're talking about the base version of the Venza, the LE, you're not going to get this touch display system either. So I actually don't know what you're going to get in the base model. I'll have to try and find a picture and put it up on the screen there. But the absolute top trim of a RAV4 hybrid, that's called the Limited 2, comes in just under 43,000 Canadian dollars. With that, you'll get the leather heated seats, 7-inch digital instrument cluster, heated wheel, all of those great things. Now, both of these systems have the exact same hybrid powertrain, so they have the exact same amount of power. There is a slight fuel efficiency benefit going to the RAV4. This car is about 120 pounds heavier, so I'm sure that contributes to that slight difference. But what I mentioned before with the interior equipment that you can get in a top trim Venza versus a top trim RAV4 Limited is fairly minor. There's no one particular thing within this car that I feel like I could really justify spending the extra money to go out and get, and the price differences between the top trim RAV4 and this is about $7,000 Canadian. But what you get in sense of style, in sense of a different purpose of a vehicle, and the fact that there's going to be a lot less of these on the road could sway towards someone that is looking for a more premium vehicle but doesn't want the hassle of the premium car ownership. This Venza offers something that I don't think any of the RAV4s could. So that concludes all my thoughts towards the 2021 Toyota Venza. If you're going out and shopping for this vehicle or the RAV4, whichever one you end up with, you're going to get an excellent product. But determining which one ends up in your driveway, I think is really going to come down to what you are looking for in a vehicle. If you need more space for people, go with the RAV4. If you need more space with things, go with the Venza. If you want something that's easier to get into and understand, go for the RAV4. If you want something that's really pushing the boundaries of what Toyota can do, go for this Venza. So I'll leave my opinion out of it of which one I'll go for, as I don't want to really sway you either way. But the Venza is an excellent product, so much so that I'm going to put it in the segment leader category of the mid-size crossovers / SUVs. This thing really is that good, and judging by the week that I've had with it so far, I know I could spend a lot more time with this vehicle. No issues whatsoever. So that's been everything from me. Thank you so much for taking the time to watching this video. Please like the video if you liked it, share it if you think other people will like it too, and if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, that makes everything I do worthwhile. Thanks a lot, Hope to see you again soon.